She found a picture from 2 decades ago, and her first choice changed everything. The box was not supposed to be there. Diane had gone through every drawer, every shelf, every corner of her mother's house over the past 3 days. She had sorted winter coats from summer dresses, thrown away expired medicine, wrapped dishes in newspaper, and taped shut 17 boxes for donation. She had done all of it with the calm, steady efficiency of a woman who had learned long ago that keeping her hands busy was the only way to keep her heart from catching up to her. Her mother, Carol, had died 6 weeks earlier, quietly in a hospital bed on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Diane had been holding her hand. Carol had looked at her once, very clearly, and then she had not looked at anything again. Diane had cried exactly twice since then, once in the hospital parking lot, once in the shower at 2 in the morning when she was certain no one could hear her. After that, she had made a list, because that was what Diane did. She made lists, she crossed things off, and she moved forward. The list said, clear out the house by the end of the month, sell by spring. She was nearly done. The attic was the last thing. It was a small attic, the kind with a pull-down ladder that creaked in a way that made you certain it was going to drop you. Diane climbed it carefully, one hand on the rail, a flashlight tucked under her arm. The air up there was thick and warm and smelled like old paper and something faintly sweet she could not name. There was not much: a broken floor lamp, a plastic bin of Christmas decorations, a cardboard box of her own childhood report cards that she set aside without opening. And then, behind the water-damaged dresser that she had already decided was too heavy to move, she saw it. A shoebox, brown, ordinary, the kind that could have held anything. She almost left it. The dresser was heavy. She would have had to lean over it at an awkward angle, drag the box forward with her fingertips, and the flashlight beam was already starting to flicker. She was tired, her back hurt. She had a 4-hour drive home the next morning. But she reached for it anyway. She did not know why later, when she tried to explain it to people. She just did. Some part of her hand moved before the rest of her caught up, and her fingers found the edge of the box, and she dragged it forward across the dusty attic floor. It was sealed, not with tape but with a rubber band, wound twice around the lid and knotted at the center in a way that seemed less like organization and more like determination, like whoever had closed it had wanted it to stay closed. Diane sat down on the attic floor, which she immediately regretted because of the dust, and she pulled the rubber band loose. Inside, there was a single photograph. Not a stack, not an envelope of loose prints. One photograph lying face up on a folded piece of pale yellow tissue paper, as if someone had placed it there deliberately, as if someone had wanted to protect it. The photo was old, not ancient, but old enough that the colors had softened at the edges into something warmer than reality. The kind of photo you could date just by looking at it. 1980s, maybe early 90s. The woman in it was sitting in what looked like a hospital chair, and she was holding a newborn baby wrapped in a white blanket, and she was looking down at the baby with an expression that Diane felt in her chest before she could name it. The woman was her mother. Carol, 20, maybe 22 years younger, hair longer, face unlined, wearing a yellow cardigan Diane had never seen, but unmistakably her. Unmistakably the same woman who had held Diane's hand 6 weeks ago in a hospital room and then stopped looking at anything. Diane stared at the photo for a long time. Then she looked at the baby. The baby in the photograph was not her. She knew this the way you know something that your brain tries to argue with even while your body has already accepted it. She had seen her own baby pictures. She knew what she looked like as a newborn. This was not that. The face was different. The shape of the head was different. Even the blanket was different, a plain white one, not the pink-striped one that appeared in every single photograph of Diane's first days of life. Her mother was holding a baby that was not Diane. And the expression on her mother's face, the one Diane had felt before she could name it now. It was goodbye. Her mother was looking at that baby the way you look at something you are about to lose and already know it. There was love in it, yes, but underneath the love there was a grief so heavy it had weight. You could feel it coming through the paper, through the faded colors, through 20-something years of a rubber band and a shoebox in an attic where no one was supposed to look. Diane sat on the dusty attic floor and did not move for a very long time. The flashlight flickered once, steadied, and the warm, sweet, papery smell of the attic settled around her, and somewhere below her the house made the small sounds that old houses make when they are being slowly emptied of the people who gave them meaning. She did not cry. She climbed back down the ladder with the shoebox under her arm, went into the kitchen, and set the photograph face down on the counter. Then she washed her hands, made herself a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table in her mother's house and drank it slowly, looking at nothing. The next morning, she did not drive home. She told herself she had more to do. The attic dresser still needed dealing with. The garage needed a second look. There were things she had not finished. But the truth, the quiet truth she did not say out loud even to herself, was that she could not leave the photo. She turned it face up on the third morning and looked at it again. Then she looked at it again at noon. Then again at night, standing in the kitchen in the dark with only the light above the stove on, holding the photo at arm's length as if distance might make it make sense. It did not make sense. Her mother had never mentioned another child, not once, not in 44 years of dinners and arguments and long phone calls and the particular closeness that comes between a mother and her only daughter, which was what Diane had always believed she was, the only one, the sole recipient of Carol's attention, her worry, her casseroles, her unsolicited opinions about Diane's hair. Only. That word sat differently now. She put the photo back in the shoebox. She put the shoebox in her overnight bag. She finished clearing the attic on the fourth day, drove the dresser to the end of the driveway with the help of her neighbor's teenage son, dropped the last 3 donation boxes at the thrift store on the corner, locked her mother's house, and got in her car. She drove the 4 hours home with the shoebox in the passenger seat, not because she had forgotten it was there, but because she could not make herself put it in the trunk. At home, she put it on her kitchen counter, not her mother's. She went to work the next day and the day after that because the school did not stop needing an administrator just because Diane's understanding of her own life had quietly come apart in an attic on a Tuesday in November. She answered emails. She sat in meetings. She signed off on a new lunch schedule and mediated a disagreement between 2 teachers who could not agree on hallway noise policy. At night, she came home and looked at the photo. She did not know the baby's name. She did not know if the baby was a boy or a girl. She did not know if the baby was alive. She did not know if the baby had grown into a person who knew that Carol existed, who had searched for her, who had wondered, who had sat somewhere in their own life with their own version of this same terrible question. She did not know anything, and she had no one to ask, because the only person who could answer was buried 6 weeks ago in the ground, in the blue scarf Diane had picked out because it was Carol's favorite color, and there was no phone call that could reach her now. On the 11th night, Diane sat at her kitchen counter with the photo in front of her and understood that she had a choice. She could put the photo back in the box, tape it shut, keep it somewhere quiet. Her mother had kept this secret for over 2 decades without anyone knowing, which meant it was possible to carry. It was possible to go on. She could call it mercy. She could call it respect for the dead. She could tell herself that some doors are kept closed for reasons, and that reasons do not disappear just because the person who had them is gone. She sat with that for a long time. Then she turned the photo over so she could not see it, and she went to bed. In the morning, she turned it face up again. She picked up her phone, she set it down, she picked it up again. She did not call anyone. What she did instead was open her laptop and search for the address of the county records office in the town where her mother had lived, because she did not know where else to start, and starting somewhere, even the wrong somewhere, felt better than sitting at a kitchen counter for another 11 nights. She had no name. She had a photograph and a date, and the specific, quiet, devastating knowledge that her mother had loved someone before her and never said a word. That was enough. She wrote down the address, closed the laptop, and went to make coffee. The box stayed open on the counter. She had not taped it shut. That, she would understand much later, was the first choice, not the decision to search, not the phone call she had not yet made, not the drive she had not yet taken. Just the box left open. Just the photo left face up. Just Diane standing in her kitchen in the early morning light, drinking her coffee and looking at a baby she did not know, choosing not to look away. Diane was not an impulsive woman. People who knew her well, her colleagues at the school, her 2 close friends, her neighbor Gloria who borrowed her parking space and occasionally her good scissors, they all used the same word when they described her. Steady. Diane was steady. She was the person you called when something went wrong, not because she always knew what to do, but because she never panicked. She assessed. She planned. She moved through problems the way water moves through rock, not by force, but by patience. She had been that way for as long as she could remember. Her mother had sometimes joked about it, said Diane had come out of the womb already filling out the paperwork. Diane had always laughed at that. She did not laugh at it now. She drove to the county record's office on a Thursday morning, 9 days after she had written down the address. She had spent those 9 days not thinking about it, or rather thinking about nothing else while appearing to think about everything else. She sat in budget meetings and saw the photograph behind her eyelids. She ate lunch at her desk and replayed her mother's voice, searching it for some frequency she had missed, some word or silence that should have been a clue. There was nothing, there had never been anything. Her mother had been, as far as Diane had ever known, a woman who kept no secrets. This turned out to be wrong. The records office was in a low, beige building that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. The woman behind the counter had reading glasses on a chain and the particular patience of someone who had spent 30 years watching people come in with half a story and leave with something heavier. Diane set her mother's information on the counter: full name, date of birth, last known address. She said she was looking for birth records filed under her mother's name. She said it calmly, steadily. The woman looked at her over the reading glasses, not unkindly. "Any specific year?" she asked. Diane had done the math. The baby in the photograph looked days old, maybe a week. Her mother in the photo looked no older than 22, 23. Carol had been born in 1951, which put the photograph somewhere in the early to mid-70s, before Diane. Before most of what she knew about her mother's life. She gave the woman a 5-year window. The woman typed, the printer hummed, the carpet cleaner smell settled around them. The woman came back with 2 documents. Diane had expected one. She had prepared herself for one. Her hands were steady when she took both papers because that was who she was, and she did not look at them until she was sitting in her car in the parking lot with the door closed and the engine off and the kind of silence that a closed car makes in the middle of a Thursday morning. The first document was her own birth certificate. She recognized it. She had a copy at home. The second one belonged to a girl named Rosalind Carroll. Born 18 months before Diane, the same mother. The same Carol who had made casseroles and given opinions about Diane's hair and held Diane's hand in a hospital room on a Tuesday in October and never, not once, said the name Rosalind out loud. Rosalind Carroll. The middle name was her own mother's name, as if Carol had written herself into the child she was giving away quietly in the only way she could, a name no one else would see, a name in a record that no one was supposed to find. Diane sat in the car for 22 minutes. She knew this because she watched the clock on the dashboard the way you watch something that is moving so that you have something neutral to focus on. Then she started the engine and drove home. She put both documents on the kitchen counter next to the photograph. She stood there looking at all 3 of them together, this small and devastating triangle of information, and she tried to understand what she was feeling. What she was feeling was strange, not what she had expected. She had expected grief or anger or the kind of betrayal that burns. Instead, what she felt was something quieter and more complicated, a deep, still sadness for her mother, the kind of sadness that comes not from what someone did to you, but from understanding, for the first time, what someone carried alone. Her mother had been young, 21 by the math, unmarried. It was the early 70s, and the world had opinions about that, sharp ones, and Carol had not had the kind of family, Diane knew this, that would have held her through it. Carol's own parents had been difficult, quiet people who believed that problems were best solved by not speaking of them. So Carol had not spoken of it. For over 40 years, she had not spoken of it. She had kept one photograph in a shoebox in an attic, sealed with a rubber band, and she had raised Diane and loved Diane and made casseroles and given opinions about Diane's hair, and she had never said the word Rosalind once. Diane wondered if it hurt every time she did not say it. She thought it probably did. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about her mother at 21, sitting in a hospital chair in a yellow cardigan, holding a baby she had already decided she could not keep. She thought about what that decision must have cost. She thought about how you go on from something like that, how you build a life on top of a silence that big and make it look like an ordinary life from the outside. You do it because you have to. You do it because the alternative is drowning. And maybe at some point the silence becomes so familiar that it almost stops hurting. Or maybe it never stops and you just get better at carrying it, and eventually you fold it so small and tuck it so deep that even the people closest to you never see the shape of it pressing against your chest. Diane got up at 5 in the morning and made coffee and sat at the kitchen counter and looked at the birth certificate with Rosalind's name on it. Rosalind was her sister. She had a sister. She had a sister who was 62 years old, somewhere in the world, who had grown up without knowing Carol's name, who had maybe wondered, who had maybe searched, who had maybe looked at her own face in the mirror sometimes and asked where it came from and found nothing. Or maybe she had not wondered at all. Maybe she had been adopted by a warm family who loved her completely, and she had built a full life and never looked back, and the last thing she needed was a stranger calling out of nowhere to inform her that her biological mother was dead. Diane did not know. She had a name and a birth certificate and a photograph. She did not know what Rosalind knew or wanted or felt or needed. She did not know if reaching out would be a gift or an intrusion. The problem with not knowing was that there was only one way to find out. She went back to work that day. She signed the lunch schedule. She sat in a meeting about building maintenance. She smiled at the right times and nodded at the right times and said the right things because she was steady, because that was who she was, and because the school needed her to be present even when she was not. That evening, she opened her laptop and searched for Rosalind. She had a name, a birth year, a birth location. These days, that was sometimes enough. She found a mutual consent adoption registry in the state. The concept was not new to her. She had heard of them in passing, in the abstract, the way you hear about things that exist in the world but have never been relevant to your own life. People who were adopted could register. Biological family members could register. If both parties registered and the information matched, contact could be made with the consent of everyone involved. Diane read the information 3 times. Then she looked at the date the registry had been created. Rosalind had registered 11 years ago. 11 years ago, a woman named Rosalind had typed her birth date and her birth location and her biological mother's name into a database and pressed submit. She had done this knowing that it might lead nowhere, that there might be no one on the other side, that she might wait and the silence would simply continue. She had registered anyway. Diane sat very still with that for a moment. Then she clicked the button to begin her own registration. It took 40 minutes to complete. She uploaded her own birth certificate, her identification, her mother's death certificate. She answered questions about what kind of contact she was open to. She selected all of them: email, phone, in person. She submitted it at 9:47 in the evening. She did not tell anyone she had done it, not her friends, not Gloria next door. She went to bed and she lay there in the dark and thought about a woman named Rosalind somewhere out there in the world who had registered 11 years ago and then waited, and she wondered what it felt like to wait that long for a door that might never open. She found out 3 days later when someone from the registry called her. The match had been made. Rosalind had been notified. She had agreed to contact. The registry coordinator, a calm woman named Patricia, who had clearly had this conversation many times and understood exactly how large it was, gave Diane a phone number. She explained that there was no obligation, that Diane could take as much time as she needed, that this was entirely her choice. Diane thanked her. She wrote the number down on a piece of paper and set it next to the photograph on the kitchen counter. The photograph, the birth certificate, the phone number. She made dinner, she ate it, she washed the dishes. Then she picked up her phone and she dialed. It rang 4 times, each one felt long. Then a voice said hello. Low, a little cautious, the voice of someone who has been waiting and is not quite sure they are ready now that the wait is over. Diane said, "Is this Rosalind?" A pause, the kind that breathes. "Yes," the voice said. "Is this Diane?" Diane's chest did something she had not prepared for, not the sharp thing she had expected, not the crash of feeling she had been braced against. Something quieter, like a door she had not known was closed, swinging open in a room she had not known existed. "Yes," she said, "it's me." There was another pause, and then Rosalind said, "I have been hoping you would call." And Diane, who had not cried at her mother's funeral, who had cried exactly twice since Carol died and both times alone, sat down on her kitchen floor and cried for the 3rd time. She did not even notice she was on the floor. They talked for 4 hours. The voice on the phone was warm. That was the first thing Diane noticed. She had not known what to expect, had tried very deliberately not to expect anything, but she had braced herself for stiffness, for the careful politeness of two strangers navigating something enormous and fragile. What she got instead was warmth, the kind that does not perform itself, the kind that is simply present. Rosalind, who went by Rose, was 62 years old. She lived in a town called Millfield, 63 miles from where Diane lived, a fact that hit them both sideways during the first few minutes of the call when they were still in the territory of careful, testing questions. Rose had lived there for 11 years. Before that, she had been in the city. Before that, other places. 63 miles. They had spent 11 years 63 miles apart and never known. Rose had a daughter named Clara. Clara was 34 and worked as a graphic designer and had given her mother a home DNA kit 2 Christmases ago as a gift, with the cheerful confidence of someone who did not understand that some gifts open rooms you cannot close again. Rose had taken the test. The results came back on a cold January morning while Clara was visiting, and they had sat together at Rose's kitchen table and looked at the screen, and Clara had said, "Oh, Mom," in a voice that meant she understood now, and Rose had sat very quietly for a long time. The kit had not found Diane. Their mother was not in any database. But it had confirmed what Rose had already been told as a younger woman, confirmed that she was adopted, confirmed that the biology of her face and her hands and the way she tilted her head when she was thinking came from somewhere she did not know. Rose had known she was adopted since she was 7 years old. Her parents, a couple named Frank and Helen, who had given her a good life, a real life, a life full of enough love that she had spent more years grateful than searching, had told her gently and clearly and answered every question she asked at 7 and at 12 and at 17 with honesty and patience. She had not grown up feeling robbed. She had grown up feeling wanted. But wanting is not the same as not wondering. At 30, something had shifted. Clara had just been born, and Rose had held her newborn daughter and looked at her face and felt something move in her chest that she could not name. Not loss, not anger, something more like a question that had been sitting quietly in a corner for 30 years and had decided now was the time to be answered. She had hired a search specialist. This was before the internet made it easier, before the DNA kits and the registries and the search tools that could, if you had enough information, lead you to a name in 4 days. It was slower then, more expensive, more uncertain. The specialist had found very little: a birth certificate, a location, a first name. Carol. Rose had said the name out loud, alone in her living room, and waited to feel something specific. She felt everything and nothing. A name was not a person. Carol was not yet real. The specialist could not find a last name, could not confirm a current address. The trail went quiet after a certain point, the way trails do when the person at the end of them has not left obvious marks. Rose had let it rest, not because she had given up. She told Diane this carefully, clearly, wanting her to understand the difference, but because she had made a decision about what kind of searching she was willing to do. She would not knock on a door that had not been left open. She would not intrude on a life that had moved on. If Carol had wanted to be found, there were ways to be found. If she had not, then Rose would respect that silence even though she did not understand it. So she had registered with the Mutual Consent database. She had put her information in and she had waited. She had checked in the early years every few months, then less often. Then she had mostly stopped checking, not because she had forgotten, but because hoping too hard for something that might not come was its own kind of wound. 11 years. And then the registry had called. I cried, Rose said. Her voice was matter-of-fact about it, the way people are about things that were real and big and are now simply true. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store for 40 minutes. Clara had to come find me. Diane laughed, a real laugh, the kind she had not expected to produce in this conversation. I was on my kitchen floor, she said. Good floors are underrated, Rose said. And just like that, the careful politeness was gone. They talked, really talked, the way you talk to someone when the pretense of being strangers has collapsed under the weight of shared reality. Rose asked about Carol, and Diane told her everything she could. The yellow cardigan, the casseroles, the unsolicited opinions about Diane's hair, the way Carol had sat in a garden chair on summer evenings and read paperback novels and would not be spoken to until the chapter was finished. The laugh she had, the big one that embarrassed her, the one she covered with her hand. Rose listened to all of it without interrupting. When Diane finished, there was a pause. She sounds like she was funny, Rose said. She was. She was very funny. Another pause, softer. I'm glad she had you, Rose said. Diane did not know what to do with that. It was one of the most generous things anyone had said to her in a long time. She held it carefully while the conversation moved on. Rose had questions she had been saving for decades. Not angry ones, not accusatory, just genuine, searching questions from a woman who had made peace with the mystery but had never stopped being curious about it. What did Carol look like? Did she have siblings? What was she like when she was young, before Diane knew her, before any of them knew her? Diane answered what she could and admitted what she could not. She had not known her mother at 21. She had known her from 38 onwards, the age Carol had been when Diane was born. The young woman in the photograph, the one in the yellow cardigan with the long hair and the expression that was goodbye, that woman was a stranger to her too. We're both trying to know the same person who is not here to know, Diane said. Rose was quiet for a moment, then she said, yes, that's exactly it. There were things about their lives that were strange to compare. Rose had grown up in the South, in a small city with wide streets and warm winters. Diane had grown up in the Northeast, in the kind of town where you knew everyone's business and the winters were long and everyone was slightly suspicious of anyone who seemed too cheerful. Their accents were different. Their references were different. Rose had been a nurse for 20 years before she retired. Diane had spent her career in education. They had both independently developed a strong opinion about the correct way to make coffee, and the opinions were opposite. They found this very funny. They also found, as the hours passed, things that were not funny at all, that were just quietly extraordinary. The way they both gestured when they talked, something their friends had separately commented on, a particular habit of using both hands for emphasis. The way they both had the same reaction to silence, not filling it immediately, sitting in it, being comfortable there. Small things, the kind of things that are ordinary in a shared life but become remarkable when there has been no shared life. I keep thinking about the 63 miles, Diane said at one point. Don't think about it too much, Rose said. You'll drive yourself around the bend. I'm already there. Fair enough, then move in permanently and at least be comfortable. They talked until it was past midnight. Diane did not notice the time passing. She noticed only that she was tired in the way you get tired after something real, not the hollow tired of a long day, but the full tired of a conversation that mattered. Before they hung up, Rose said something that Diane had not expected. I found out about Carol, she said. I found out she existed, her name, her location. I found that years ago, before the registry. Diane went still. I didn't do anything with it, Rose said. I found her name and her city, and then I sat with it for a long time, and I decided that I wasn't going to show up in someone's life who hadn't asked me to be there, not even hers, not even after everything. Diane understood in that moment something about her sister that she thought she would spend a long time understanding more deeply. She kept your photograph, Diane said, one photograph in a shoebox in the attic. Silence. She kept it, Rose said. She kept it. The silence stretched between them, warm and heavy with everything it held. Tell me about the photograph, Rose said. Diane did. She described it carefully, every detail. The yellow cardigan, the hospital chair, the white blanket, the way the colors had softened at the edges, the expression on Carol's face. She heard Rose breathing on the other end. She was saying goodbye, Rose said. Her voice was very quiet. Yes, Diane said. But she kept it. She kept it for over 40 years. In a box she sealed herself. Another pause, longer. She didn't forget, Rose said. Not a question, just something she needed to say out loud. Something she had been carrying without evidence for a very long time and was now, for the first time, setting down. No, Diane said, she didn't forget. They hung up shortly after that. Diane sat in her kitchen for a while after, not doing anything, just sitting. The photograph was still on the counter, the birth certificate, the phone number she no longer needed. She looked at the photograph, at her mother's face, at the expression she had finally, correctly named. She had called it goodbye. Rose had called it goodbye too. But sitting there in the quiet of her kitchen past midnight with the warmth of a 4-hour phone call still in her chest, Diane looked at it once more and thought that maybe goodbye was only part of it. Maybe it was also the face of someone taking something with her, holding it so completely in one look because she knew she would not get another one, drinking it in, making it permanent. The face of someone who intended to remember. She had remembered, she had kept the photograph. She had carried the silence and the secret and the name she never said out loud, and she had carried it for 40 years, and somewhere in the back of an attic in a sealed shoebox she had left the evidence that she had never stopped. Diane touched the edge of the photograph with one finger. "I found her, Mom," she said to the empty kitchen. The house was quiet, the way houses get quiet when they are just houses and not homes anymore, but the quiet felt different tonight, less like absence, more like the space after something has been said that needed to be said. She put the photograph carefully back on top of the birth certificate. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in weeks. They met on a Tuesday in March, which neither of them planned and both of them later thought was appropriate. It had been a Tuesday when Carol died. It had been a Tuesday when Diane found the photograph. Some weeks, Diane thought, are just made of Tuesdays. The diner was Rose's suggestion. It was equidistant between their two towns, which Rose had measured precisely because she was the kind of person who measured things precisely, and she had chosen it by looking up reviews until she found one that described the coffee as honest. Honest coffee, she had explained to Diane over the phone, was her primary requirement in a meeting place. She did not want great coffee. Great coffee was showing off. She wanted coffee that did what it said it would do. Diane had thought about this for several days afterward and decided it told her something important about her sister. They had been on the phone every day since the first call, not always for long, sometimes just 20 minutes, sometimes an hour, always the same ease that had shown up in the first conversation and had not left. Diane had told her two closest friends about Rose by then. They had reacted with the particular combination of shock and warmth that good friends produce when something large happens to someone they love. Gloria next door had cried, which was not unusual for Gloria, but she had also brought over a cake, which was. Diane had not told anyone else. Not yet. It felt like something she needed to hold a little longer before she shared it with the wider world. Rose had told Clara, who had called Diane directly 2 days later to introduce herself. Clara's voice was cheerful and slightly overwhelming, and she had asked Diane 4 questions in the first 2 minutes and apologized immediately for all 4 of them, which made Diane like her immediately. The morning of the Tuesday in March, Diane got up early. She showered and dressed carefully. Not formally, she did not want to make it formal, but carefully. She made coffee. She looked at the photograph, which still lived on the counter, which she had never put away. She put it in her bag. She drove the 31 miles to the diner. She arrived first. She was always early. It was a condition she had accepted about herself years ago. The diner was small and warm and smelled like coffee and something baking. She took a table by the window because the light was good there, and she had the sudden, specific thought that she wanted to be able to see Rose's face clearly. She ordered coffee. She held the mug with both hands and watched the parking lot. Rose pulled in at 12 minutes past the agreed time. She had told Diane she was almost certainly going to be a few minutes late because she was constitutionally incapable of being on time, which she had announced without apology, and Diane had found this so refreshing she had laughed for longer than the comment probably warranted. She watched Rose get out of the car. She had not known what she expected. She admitted this to herself now, for the obvious things, resemblance, the features that would confirm what the biology already had. She had studied the photograph so many times that she knew her mother's face in it by heart, and she had wondered how much of that face she would see in the woman walking toward her. What she saw was this: a woman in her early 60s, tall, wearing a dark blue coat, moving with the easy confidence of someone who is comfortable taking up space. Brown hair, mostly gray now, cut short, a way of carrying herself that was upright without being rigid, the kind of person who, if you passed her on the street, you would notice without necessarily knowing why. She was looking at the diner window, looking for Diane. Diane raised her hand. Rose saw her, and Rose smiled. It was not a performance of a smile. It was not the cautious, diplomatic smile of someone meeting a stranger in a difficult circumstance. It was a real smile, the full kind, the kind that arrives because something has happened that genuinely produces it. Diane felt her own face do the same thing. Rose came through the door, she crossed the diner, she stopped at the table. They looked at each other for a moment. There is a particular kind of looking that happens when two people are searching each other's faces for something that was missing for a long time. It is not rude, it is not aggressive, it is very focused and very tender at the same time, like reading something you have been waiting to read and wanting to go slowly so you do not miss anything. Then Rose said, "Well, hello." And Diane said, "Hello." And Rose sat down. The coffee arrived without either of them ordering it. which meant the waitress had seen Rose come in and correctly identified the social situation, and they both noticed this at the same time and exchanged a look that said, without words, this person is good at her job. Rose picked up her mug. She said, "You look like her." Diane had not expected that. "I look like Carol." Around the eyes, yes, Rose tilted her head. "I wondered on the phone what I'd see. I thought I'd see the photograph, but it's different in person. It's just you, and then occasionally something shifts and I can see her." Diane looked at Rose. "What about you?" she asked. Rose gave a small, complicated smile. "I have never in my life looked like anyone I was standing next to," she said. "You learn to make peace with that. But sometimes Clara tilts her head a certain way and I think, where did that come from, and now maybe I know." They talked as they had been talking for weeks on the phone, but differently now because the other person was present, was real, was sitting across a table in a warm diner in March with honest coffee and good light coming through the window. Rose asked to see the photograph. Diane had known she would ask. She had been carrying it in her bag all morning with the awareness of it there, the specific weight of it. She reached in and took it out and set it on the table between them. Rose picked it up. She held it the way you hold something that you have been waiting a long time to hold, with a kind of attention that is different from ordinary looking. She did not speak. She looked at Carol's face, at her own infant self wrapped in the white blanket, at the yellow cardigan, at the edges softened by time and careful keeping. A long moment passed. "She looks like she's saying goodbye," Rose said. It was almost exactly what Diane had thought when she first named the expression. She had not told Rose that. She had described the photo in detail, but she had not told her what she thought the look on Carol's face meant. And Rose had landed on the same word. "Goodbye." Diane said, "Yes, that's what I thought." Rose nodded slowly. She kept looking at the photograph. "But she kept it," she said. "She kept it. For all that time. For all that time." Rose set the photograph down on the table. She did not push it back toward Diane. She left it between them in the center of the table where they could both see it. "I want you to know something," Rose said. She looked up at Diane directly with the steady, clear look of someone who has decided to say a true thing and is not going to dress it up. "I spent a lot of years being angry, not at her or not only at her. At the silence, I think, the not knowing. I built a lot of stories to fill the not knowing and not all of them were kind." Diane listened. "I had to let those stories go," Rose said. "When I registered with the database, I had to decide that I was going in open. Not with the stories I'd made up, not with what I'd decided she must have felt or must have thought, just open, because if I wasn't, I'd meet the truth and mistake it for one of my stories." "And," Diane said. Rose looked at the photograph again, at Carol, at the expression that was goodbye. "The truth is gentler than most of my stories," she said. Diane thought about her mother, about the attic, about 40 years of a rubber band and a sealed box, about a name she had never once said out loud. "She didn't forget you," Diane said. Rose nodded. She had known this since the phone call. She knew it more now. "No," she said, "she didn't." They sat together in the quiet of that for a moment. Two women in a diner in March, daughters of the same woman, strangers for decades, sharing a table and a photograph and a grief that belonged to both of them in different ways. Outside, the light was changing the way March light does in the middle of the afternoon, softening and going golden at the edges. Diane thought of something she had not let herself think about too directly since all of this began. She thought of her mother at 21, alone with a choice that the world in that era did not give young women many good options inside of. She thought of what it cost to make it. She thought of the yellow cardigan and the hospital chair and the expression that was goodbye and the 40 years of silence after. She thought of what it takes to carry something like that for a lifetime without setting it down. She picked up her coffee. "What do you want to do from here?" she asked Rose. Rose looked at her. Then she said something Diane had not anticipated and would think about for a long time afterward. "I want to know you," Rose said. "Not Carol, not the stories, you. Whatever this becomes, I want it to be about who we actually are now, not who we might have been." Diane looked at her sister. Her sister. The word was still new. She tried it in her mind occasionally, the way you try on something you are not sure fits yet, and each time it fit a little better. Sister, Rose. The woman across the table in the dark blue coat, who measured distances precisely and required honest coffee, and had once spent 40 minutes crying in a supermarket parking lot. "I want that too," Diane said. Rose picked up her mug. "Same time next week," she said. "Yes," Diane said, "same time next week." Outside, the March light held. The photograph sat between them on the table. Carol in her yellow cardigan, holding the baby she could not keep, wearing the face of someone who had decided to remember. She had remembered. They were here. That was the end of one story and the beginning of another, and neither of them was in a hurry to decide which was which. There was time now. There was a Tuesday every week, and honest coffee and 63 miles of road between two towns that were no longer quite as separate as they had been, and there was all of it still ahead of them, unwritten, unhurried, theirs. Diane left the photograph on the table between them for the rest of the afternoon. It belonged to both of them now. The second Tuesday was easier. The third was easier still. By April, the drive had started to feel ordinary, which was its own kind of miracle. 31 miles on a road that passed through 3 small towns and one stretch of open farmland where the fields were just beginning to show the first green of spring. Diane drove it every week and began to know its details. The red barn at the halfway point. The gas station with the excellent homemade pie sign that she had never actually stopped at and always meant to. The particular curve in the road just before Millfield where the diner appeared between 2 old oak trees as if it had been there for centuries, which she learned it essentially had. The diner was called simply Clark's, named for a family no one currently working there was related to. It had been there since 1962 and had not changed much, which the locals considered a virtue. The booths were original. The coffee was, as Rose had determined, honest. The waitress who had brought Rose her coffee without being asked was named Donna, and she was working every Tuesday when they came in. And by the third week, she stopped asking what they wanted and simply brought 2 coffees and a plate of the warm biscuits that were not on the menu but were available if Donna liked you. Donna, it emerged, liked them. "We're her project," Rose said one afternoon, watching Donna refill their mugs without making eye contact, as if their approval was not required. "She's decided we're hers to look after." "Worse things," Diane said. "Considerably worse things," Rose agreed. They had settled into a rhythm without planning one. They arrived, coffee appeared, they talked. The hours went by the way hours go when you are in a conversation that has no obligation to end. They discovered week by week the architecture of each other's lives, the ordinary things first, routines, preferences, habits, then the larger things, the choices made and not made, the roads taken and the ones left behind. Rose had been married once, for 11 years, to a man named Gerald who was kind and decent, and with whom she had simply, gradually, with no drama and no villain, grown into a different kind of friendship than a marriage should be. They had parted without bitterness. He still sent Clara a birthday card every year. Rose spoke of him with the warmth you have for someone you once loved well and continue to wish well from a comfortable distance. Diane had not been married. She had been close once in her late 30s, to a man named Paul who was interesting and warm and fundamentally unwilling to stay in one place long enough for a life to be built. She had let him go without too much grief. She told Rose this with the dry self-awareness that Rose had identified early as one of Diane's primary communication tools, probably been too busy organizing the breakup to feel it properly. "I've been told," Diane said, "that I process emotionally by making lists." "Who told you that?" "My therapist, also my 2 best friends, also my mother, who said it less gently than the others." Rose looked at her with affection. "I make lists too," she said, "but I cry first and organize after, different order." "Same destination. Efficient on different ends," Diane said. "Maybe we balanced each other out somewhere we didn't know about." Diane considered this. "I think that's either very comforting or slightly sad." "Can it be both?" "Yes," Diane admitted, "it can be both." The conversations moved, as good conversations do, between the light and the heavy without announcement. They would be talking about something small, a recipe Rose had tried, a difficult parent Diane had dealt with at the school, the gas station pie that remained untested, and then without any signal the conversation would tilt and they would be somewhere deeper, talking about what it meant to be someone's daughter. About what you inherit from the people who raise you and what comes from somewhere else, from the biology you carry without knowing where it began. Diane had started thinking about inheritance differently since October. She had always thought of herself as Carol's daughter, wholly and completely, shaped by her mother in all the obvious ways and many of the subtle ones. She still believed that. She was still Carol's daughter, still made of casseroles and paperback novels and the big laugh covered with a hand and the particular stubbornness that Carol had always called determination and Diane's friends had always called something slightly less flattering. But she was also now this, sitting in a diner on Tuesdays, learning a different woman's particular ways of being in the world and finding in them not a mirror but a new angle, a way of seeing herself that was not her mother's view and not her own and was therefore something new. There was an afternoon in late April when Rose told her about the years after the DNA kit, the quiet work of understanding. She had spent a long time, Rose said, trying to figure out what she actually felt versus what she thought she was supposed to feel. People had assumptions about adoption, about searching, about finding. They expected a specific emotional arc, discovery, grief, reunion, resolution. They expected it to have the shape of a story they already knew. It doesn't have that shape, Rose said. It has its own shape. And the shape is different for everyone, and it changes as you go. What shape does yours have? Diane asked. Rose thought about it. She was quiet for long enough that Donna came over, checked the coffee levels, and retreated without a word. A river, Rose said finally, not a straight one, the kind that goes around things, floods sometimes, dries out in places, but keeps going. Diane held this. I think mine might be a list, she said. Rose laughed, the real laugh, the one Diane had come to know by then, the one that arrived without warning and was larger than her speaking voice. Of course it is, she said. Is it alphabetical? Chronological, Diane said. I'm not unreasonable. They laughed together at that until Donna gave them a look of tolerant affection from behind the counter. Clara came to the diner once on a Sunday in May when Diane drove out to meet her properly. She arrived 12 minutes early, which Rose explained was overcorrecting because Clara knew she had been told she was late for everything and was making an effort in special circumstances. Clara was warm and slightly overwhelming in exactly the way she had sounded on the phone, and she asked questions with the focused energy of someone genuinely interested in the answers, and she looked at Diane across the table with an expression that took Diane a moment to identify. It was a relief. Clara had watched her mother wait for 11 years. Had watched her check the registry in the early years and stop checking. Had watched her make peace with the uncertainty, the particular grace of someone who has decided not to spend her life hoping for something that might not come. Clara had wanted this for her mother long enough that now that it was here, she was looking at Diane the way you look at something you were afraid might not be real. She talks about you every day, Clara said. Every day since the first phone call. She calls me and says, Diane said this or Diane did this, and I can tell she's just finding the excuse to say your name. Rose looked at the window. That's a significant exaggeration, she said, in a tone that confirmed it was not. Diane thought of her mother, of 40 years of not saying a name. Of all the times Carol must have found and not taken the excuse. She thought of Rose saying it differently, every day, out loud, as if it were ordinary. She thought that was not a small thing. On the way home that evening, she stopped at the gas station with the homemade pie sign. The pie was apple. It was extraordinarily good, much better than it had any right to be in a gas station on the side of a state road in the early evening in May. She ate it in the car in the parking lot and then called Rose. The pie is real, she said. A pause, then, is it good? It's astonishing. I'm slightly angry that I waited this long. We'll go together next week, Rose said. I'll meet you there. We'll have pie before the diner. That's 2 breakfasts. Diane, we are women in our 60s. We can have 2 breakfasts if we want. Diane sat in the parking lot with her phone and felt something she recognized after a moment as happiness. Uncomplicated, present, actual happiness. The kind that is not relief or resolution or the absence of grief, but just its own thing, existing alongside everything else without canceling any of it out. She had not been in her mother's attic looking for this. She had been looking to clear out a house and cross things off a list. And instead she had found a shoebox and a rubber band and a sealed photograph and a door she had not known existed, and she had not taped it shut again. And now here she was on a Tuesday in May in a gas station parking lot eating extraordinary pie and talking to her sister. Her sister. The word was ordinary now. She had not noticed it becoming ordinary. That was how it worked, she understood. You said a thing enough times and held a truth long enough, and one morning you woke up and it was just part of you, just the landscape, just the river that goes around things and floods sometimes and keeps moving. She drove home in the spring evening with the windows down. She thought of Carol, she thought of her often now, but differently than she had in those first weeks after October. Less as someone lost, more as someone who was still present in the ways that mattered, in Diane's face, in Diane's stubbornness, in the laugh she covered with her hand. In the photograph on the kitchen counter that now had company, a picture taken at the diner in February, Diane and Rose sitting across from each other with coffee mugs raised, Donna's arm just visible at the edge of the frame, having taken the photo before they thought to ask her. 2 daughters, 1 table. The light coming through the window at the angle that light takes in late winter when it is just beginning to consider becoming spring. Carol had kept 1 photograph for 40 years. Diane kept both of them now. She got home, changed, made tea, and sat at the kitchen counter. She looked at the photographs side by side, the old one and the new one, a beginning and what came after the beginning. She had not planned any of this. She had planned to clear out a house and drive home and get back to her list. Instead, she had a sister, a Tuesday every week, honest coffee and good pie, and a woman named Donna who had decided to look after them. She had Clara's relieved smile and Rose's river metaphor and a new angle on her own face, her own hands, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. She had 44 years of being Carol's daughter, and running underneath all of it without her knowledge, a history that had been waiting in a sealed box for the right hand to open it. She had not opened it to find Rose. She had opened it because she could not. And Rose had been there. Had registered 11 years ago with the specific, careful hope of someone who has decided to leave a door open without standing at it every minute waiting. Carol had left a door open too, in her way, in the only way she seemed to have been able to manage, a sealed box in an attic, a photograph she could not destroy, evidence buried carefully that she had not forgotten. She had not forgotten. None of them had forgotten anything, it turned out. They had each been carrying it in different ways, in different directions, and it had taken 1 dusty attic and 1 flickering flashlight and 1 hand that reached for a box without knowing why, to bring all that carrying into the same room. Diane touched the edge of the old photograph 1 more time. "I found her," she said to the empty kitchen, "and she's good, she's really good." The house was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet than it had been in October, not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of a place that holds something whole. She finished her tea. She went to bed. Tuesday was 6 days away. She was already looking forward to it.